Hey, Exercise Science. I hope you guys are doing well. So we're finishing up our unit on the muscular system. And the last part of this unit, as you guys have taken the notes on, is about muscle adaptation. And so the first thing that I want to talk about is the difference between a concentric and an eccentric contraction. So a concentric contraction is basically what's happening when the muscle is shortening or flexing. So you can just think like concentric contract. So to contract basically means to shorten. And when that happens, the muscle flexes as it pulls on bone. The eccentric contraction is when the muscle is lengthening. So, you can see in here, when you flex your bicep, that bicep muscle shortens. That's a concentric contraction. And when you extend the arm, that's the eccentric contraction. That bicep muscle is lengthening. Both types of contractions can cause muscle tears. And remember from the presentation that in order for muscles to grow, muscle needs to be stressed. It needs to tear. There are these tiny little micro tears that occur in those little tiny microfilaments that you guys learned about, that actin and myosin. And those tears occur when you're working out, when the muscle is under stress. And then those tears are repaired by the protein that you're consuming in your diet. And that protein can come from animal protein, or as we will discuss when we do digestion and nutrition, from plant protein, if you're a vegetarian or you're a vegan. So you need to stress the muscle in order for it to grow. And that's why, if you're somebody who goes and runs on the treadmill every day for 20 minutes doing the same exact thing week after week, sure, you're going to maintain your fitness and you're going to be healthy. You're going to be burning calories, but you're not going to see much muscle growth. And the reason is because your body adapts to that type of activity and you're no longer stressing the muscle. So since there's no stress, there's no tear, there's no growth. That's why it's so important to switch up your workout. Or if you're strength training, you start at a certain weight on week 1, and then week 2 or week 3, you're starting to increase that weight so that the muscle is under stress so that you can allow for some growth. And so concentric contractions, when the muscle is shortening, obviously that muscle is working, that can cause those tiny tears. But the eccentric contraction can also cause those tiny muscular tears too. In fact, studies have shown that you will actually get better and more muscle growth with that eccentric contraction because that muscle is actually under a little bit more stress. You may have heard of these as negatives. So let's say you're doing a pull-up on a pull-up bar, right? So you're pulling yourself up, and mostly that's the latissimus dorsi, the lat muscles that are contracting. But that, obviously is going to cause muscle tearing and muscle growth. But if you want to really build that muscle, you can work on the negative. So you pull yourself up and then you can slowly lower yourself down rather than just dropping out of that pull-up. And that type of stress on that muscle has been shown to allow for a lot of muscle growth. There's also something called an isometric contraction, iso meaning same, and this is where there's no active shortening or lengthening of the muscle itself. It is under tension, but there's no shortening or lengthening. So if you're holding a plank, that would be an isometric contraction. If you were doing the pull-up, you pull yourself up, that's concentric contraction, and then if you hold yourself up at the top of that pull-up bar with your chin over the bar, that's the isometric contraction. There's no active shortening or lengthening happening at that moment, and then the muscle is under tension. And then the eccentric contraction would be as you're slowly lowering yourself down. So that's something to work into your workout routine. You can look some of those activities up, like what does it mean to work the negative? So if you're doing a bicep curl, getting ready for the beach, you want your guns out, the concentric contraction, that would be this. The eccentric or the negative would be slowly lengthening that bicep muscle, causing those tiny micro tears, which means growth. Yay, and we all like to see muscle growth. So that kind of takes care of the eccentric, concentric, and isometric contractions. So the next thing that's kind of interesting to talk about is the difference between slow twitch and fast twitch muscle fibers. Now, you may have heard of this before, you may not, but it's actually pretty interesting. Your fast twitch muscle fibers, these are the fibers. Remember, your muscle is made up of tiny fibers. That's what tears and how growth happens. But these are the fibers that fire first. So if you're doing any kind of quick sprints or lifting, these muscle fibers will fire first. And you may remember cellular respiration from biology. We obviously need oxygen to make energy, but it takes time for that oxygen to get to the muscle, for energy to be made. So those muscles need to be able to work without the presence of oxygen for a short period of time. So these these fast twitch muscle fibers, they work without oxygen because, oxygen hasn't gotten to the muscles yet. You're breathing, but it takes time for it to get there. So they're the first to fire. They are anaerobic, which means that they work without the presence of oxygen, but they can tire out really quick because there's no oxygen present, so very little ATP. So if you are doing any kind of like quick sprinting, any like bursts of speed that's like 20 seconds to 30 seconds, this would be your fast twitch muscle fibers. These also have the ability to get very large. As you know, your strength training. So a sprinter or a weightlifter would be working their fast twitch muscle fibers. And if you look at a sprinter like Usain Bolt or a weightlifter, you can see that they're pretty dense and they're, very muscly. They're very strong. And this is obviously important for their power, right? And their speed. So the slow twitch muscle fibers, these fire after the fast twitch, and these are your fibers that are in it for the long run. They require oxygen. So again, you're breathing, oxygen has gotten to the muscles, and they're like your endurance fibers. So, anything that you're doing that's over a minute long, so like let's say you're running up and down the soccer field, back and forth, because you're a midfielder or something like that, you would be activating mostly your slow twitch muscle fibers. If you were a long distance runner, slow twitch muscle fibers. Anything that's, again, like in it for the long run, these are the slow twitch. Marathon runners or long distance runners, if you look at them, they, just typically are skinnier. They don't have as much muscle mass because these fibers cannot get as large as the slow twitch. So if you look at the presentation that I posted, the sprinter versus the marathon runner, the sprinter's like massive, right? That muscle is important for power and speed. And then the marathon runner is like really skinny. And that is because they don't want all this muscle mass because it's heavy and it's hard to move around for long distances. Pretty much you're born with equal amounts of slow and fast twitch fibers. There are some like genetic studies and different people all over the world about how they might have more fast twitch fibers, so they're better sprinters, or more slow twitch fibers, so they're better marathon runners. But pretty much you're born with equal amounts. It's what you do with those muscle fibers that's going to make you the kind of athlete that you're going to be. So, if you're a sprinter, you're not going out and running 5 miles. You're looking to build those fast twitch muscle fibers. So you're in the weight room lifting weights a couple days a week, right? Using those fast twitch fibers, and you're doing sprints, short bursts of energy. If you are a long distance athlete, then you're probably doing less weight training and more long distance running. So think about the kind of athlete that you are. I know when you guys did your projects, you had to talk about anaerobic versus aerobic. By the way, I'm grading those. It's taking some time. But you had to indicate, what kind of muscle fibers the athlete would be using. And, a lot of you that were doing those quick bursts of energy and speed did indicate that it was the anaerobic system, which would also be those fast twitch fibers. So it's kind of cool. And also, If you look at their color, if you see the PowerPoint that I had posted, like we said, the fast twitch muscle fibers, they don't require oxygen. So they're actually white in color. And then the slow twitch muscle fibers require oxygen, and they're red in color. And the reason for that is because, oxygen contains a protein called hemoglobin. And the protein in muscle is very similar. It's myoglobin, and that requires oxygen. So those oxygen-rich muscle fibers are going to be red, whereas the oxygen-poor muscle fibers are going to be white. And you can kind of see this difference in light versus dark meat when you're eating like a chicken or turkey, whereas you've got like the breast of the meat is white in color because that's filled with those fast twitch muscle fibers. And then the legs are red in color, or darker meat, because those are filled with the slower twitch muscle fibers because they've got to be able to run long distances. That's pretty much it. In terms of like muscle fatigue and cramping, this is always interesting to a lot of athletes because this happens to them. Muscle fatigue where you feel like you just can't go any further, that you've got to stop. This happens because of a few things. First, it could be not enough oxygen supplied to the muscles, because you need oxygen to make ATP, and ATP is needed to power your muscles. So it could just be simply resting and breathing and allowing your body some time to recover. That's why you feel fatigue when you're doing like a max set of back squats or something like that. You do a max set of 5 reps. You just can't get that 6th because you've reached complete muscle fatigue, and those fast twitch fibers just aren't firing anymore. They need rest, and that's really the only thing that you can do to overcome fatigue is just rest, which is why you rest a good amount of time between your sets. The other thing is a decreased glycogen store. Glycogen is stored sugar. So a lot of you athletes, you have some kind of sugar store in your body from eating food before you go out and you're playing in your game, but eventually that can become depleted, especially if you don't have enough. So that's why it's important to always bring some of that fast-acting sugar. So it could be like fruit, even candy can work. In our CrossFit competitions, a lot of times we eat like Swedish fish right before we compete because it's just like quick sugar. But we'll get into diet and stuff in the next chapter. But glycogen depletion can be a reason for muscle fatigue. And then cramps, a lot of people say, it's like the lactic acid buildup. Lactic acid is a waste product of metabolism. So it's part of cellular respiration. You guys might remember when oxygen is not present during that anaerobic activity, a waste product that forms from the breakdown of glucose is lactic acid. It's called lactate, and that can build up in the muscles, and that can cause like tightness and sometimes cramping. Although there's been some studies done that it has nothing to do with lactic acid. But to work the lactic acid out of the muscles, to get rid of that heaviness and that tightness you might feel after a good workout, a lot of foam rolling and using a lacrosse ball and simply just like moving around to work out that lactic acid, like massage and stuff like that, can help. But cramps really are a few things. A lack of potassium, like what you would get in bananas, because you guys might remember the PowerPoint, when actin and myosin, the tiny little protein filaments in the muscle, when they connect and they slide across past one another, muscle contracts. ATP, or energy, is needed for that contraction to happen. But once the contraction happens, those muscles need to relax. And that's actin and myosin breaking away from one another. You need ATP for that to occur. So if there's not enough ATP, the muscle can actually stay contracted and cramped up. What makes ATP? Well, glucose and oxygen. So if your glycogen stores are low, it can cause cramping because there's not enough ATP being made to allow the muscle to relax. If your oxygen is low, again, can cause cramping because there's not enough ATP for the muscles to relax. So a lot of times when you're cramping up, you just need to stop, breathe, take in some deep breaths, get the oxygen to the muscles, maybe eat some sugar, and it should go away with some time. So that's pretty much it for the really kind of cool muscle adaptations. I mean, I just basically gave you guys like 4 days of a lesson in 15 minutes if you're still watching, which I hope you are. There are some really cool activities that we do in class with like muscle fatigue, but it's kind of hard to coordinate virtually. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed. I miss seeing you guys. And, enjoy. Oh, it's supposed to be really nice this weekend. So I hope you guys get outside and get some fresh air. Bye.